House of Wax. When House of Wax hit theaters in April of 1953, audiences poured in, but critics barely flinched. Despite pulling in an estimated $5 to $6 million domestically on a modest $1 million budget, reviews were lukewarm at best. While moviegoers were mesmerized by the film's use of 3D, then a fresh novelty, many critics wrote it off as a gimmick parade. One review from the period labeled it more spectacle than substance, echoing the widespread skepticism surrounding 3D as a cinematic fad. At the center of the film stood Vincent Price, portraying the vengeful sculptor Dr. Henry Jared. Although Price had been circling the horror genre for years, this marked his first major lead, and it stuck. His performance, a blend of quiet menace and tragic depth, was largely overlooked by critics at the time. Today, it's often pinpointed as the role that cemented his status as a horror icon. Behind the camera was director André de Toth, who in a twist of irony was blind in one eye and couldn't even see the 3D effects himself. Still, he managed to craft a technically ambitious production using the cumbersome Natural Vision 3D system, which required dual strip projection and meticulous coordination. The film leaned into the format with scenes designed to pop, most infamously, a paddleball sequence that seemed to taunt the audience directly. Critics looked askance, audiences ate it up. The film's success triggered a short-lived 3D boom in the mid-1950s, though few imitators matched its impact. Over the decades, House of Wax has undergone a critical reevaluation. Scholars now highlight its gothic production design, eerie atmosphere, and its role in elevating horror from B-movie status to box office gold. Stories claim that Vincent Price never expected the film to last, allegedly calling it a fun experiment in private. But the audience saw something else. A chilling spectacle that refused to fade even as the gimmicks wore off. Imitation of Life. When Douglas Sirk's remake of Imitation of Life premiered in 1959, critics didn't just pan it, they practically brushed it aside as cinematic fluff. The New York Times called it lushly synthetic and overwrought, while others scoffed at its melodramatic tone. But audiences? They turned out in large numbers and kept coming back. The film raked in over $50 million globally, a staggering figure for a project that reportedly cost under $2 million to make. At its glossy surface, it looked like another tearjerker, but underneath it tackled taboo topics for the time: racial identity, class, and maternal sacrifice. Juanita Moore's performance as a black mother rejected by her daughter earned her an Oscar nomination, though early reviews barely acknowledged her. Lana Turner, returning to the screen after a real-life scandal involving her daughter and the fatal stabbing of mob figure Johnny Stompanato in 1958, was accused by some critics of being too glamorous for the role. Others hinted her casting was more about headlines than acting chops. Still, her presence resonated with audiences, especially those grappling with fractured family dynamics. Film scholar Molly Haskell later argued that Sirk's melodramas, often brushed off as soap operas, were covert critiques of American post-war ideals. By the 1970s, academics began to reevaluate Imitation of Life as a subversive social commentary. Some have proposed Sirk used the film's emotional excess as camouflage to smuggle in radical ideas about race and class. Today, it's no longer just a weepy classic. It's seen as one of the boldest studio films of its era. Gidget. When Gidget debuted in 1959, most critics shrugged it off. Variety derided it as lightweight, and the New York Times reportedly labeled it a breezy, forgettable comedy. But while critics looked unimpressed, audiences packed theaters. The film struck a surprising chord with teenagers, especially young women, and quietly pulled in strong box office numbers, well above expectations for a modest teen romance. Some estimates suggest it earned several $1 million, a notable feat for a genre often written off by the press. Starring Sandra Dee as Frances Lawrence, a spirited teen who swaps debutante norms for a surfboard, Gidget presented a female coming-of-age story at a time when Hollywood rarely took such narratives seriously. The film's popularity helped kick off a wave of surf-themed cinema and inspired a string of sequels, including Gidget Goes Hawaiian in 1961. By 1965, the character had become so iconic that ABC launched a television series starring Sally Field in her breakout role. Film historians have since pointed to Gidget as a pivotal moment in youth cinema. It was one of the first mainstream films to center a teenage girl's inner world without reducing her to a side character or love interest. Some observers maintain that the film's lukewarm, critical reception may have stemmed from its unapologetically feminine focus. an angle that didn't resonate with the male-dominated critical circles of the time. Anecdotes claim that Gidget even helped push surfing into the American mainstream, just ahead of the Beach Boys' rise in the early 1960s. Whether or not it truly led the charge, the film captured a cultural undercurrent that critics missed entirely. In hindsight, Gidget wasn't just a beachside diversion, it was a pop culture spark that lit up a generation. Harem Scarum. Released by MGM in 1965, Harem Scarum starred Elvis Presley as a pop singer caught in a whirlwind of espionage in a fictional Middle Eastern kingdom. Critics didn't hold back. Variety reportedly wrote it off as a confused, cliché-laden mess, while the New York Times echoed similar disdain. The backlash focused on its cartoonish stereotypes and implausible plot twists. Presley karate-chopping palace guards and serenading veiled dancers and glittering sets that looked more Vegas than Arabia. Yet despite the critical pile-on, the film pulled in over $2 million at the box office, according to MGM ledgers. Not a blockbuster by Presley's standards, but far from a flop. Fans showed up, drawn by his enduring charm and the escapist flair that defined many of his mid-60s films. Behind-the-scenes talk hinted Presley wasn't thrilled with the project, allegedly calling it a mistake in private conversations. Some theorized that Colonel Tom Parker, his ever-controlling manager, pushed him into the role to keep the cash flowing, regardless of artistic merit. Film historian Leonard Maltin later dubbed it a howler, and among Elvis diehards, it's become a cult oddity, mocked for its kitsch but cherished as a time capsule of an era when Presley's star power could outshine the script. Where the Boys Are. Released by MGM in 1960, Where the Boys Are walked a fine line between light teen escapism and social commentary, one that critics didn't quite know how to handle. While marketed as a spring break romp, the film's underlying themes of female independence and shifting gender norms made some reviewers uncomfortable. Reports from the time suggest that critics found its tone uneven, unsure whether it was satire, morality tale, or teen fantasy. Yet audiences, especially younger viewers, flocked to it. The film's popularity helped catapult Fort Lauderdale into a spring break hotspot, with local officials reportedly overwhelmed by a sudden influx of tens of thousands of students by early 1961. It's been whispered that city leaders later regretted the tourism boom it sparked. The title song, performed by Connie Francis, who also starred in the film, became a radio hit, further cementing the movie's cultural footprint. While some film scholars debate whether it directly launched the beach party genre, its influence is hard to dismiss. Some say it nudged studios toward bolder, female-led stories, though no single film can claim full credit. Dolores Hart's portrayal of Merritt brought unexpected depth to a character caught between tradition and change. Today, Where the Boys Are is often seen as a transitional piece, bridging the tail end of the golden age and the cultural shifts of the 60s. Critics may have hesitated, but audiences made their verdict clear. Lover Come Back. Released in 1961, Lover Come Back was brushed off by many critics as just another glossy Doris Day and Rock Hudson romantic comedy, a rerun of Pillow Talk with new outfits. The New York Times dubbed it slick and shallow, while Variety praised the performances but largely sidestepped the movie's more incisive jabs at consumer culture and workplace inequality. Yet audiences didn't seem to mind. They packed theaters, making it one of Universal's top-grossing films that year. Behind the champagne bubbles and cheeky misunderstandings was a script by Stanley Shapiro that aimed sharper than expected. A satire of Madison Avenue's ad world, this feature poked holes in corporate absurdity and gender norms with surprising precision. Day's character, Carol Templeton, wasn't just a love interest. She was a professional rival holding her ground in a male-dominated industry. Film historian Molly Haskell has noted how Day's roles often flipped expectations, and this one fit that mold. A few analysts presume the movie's lukewarm critical reception stemmed from discomfort with a female lead who refused to play by the standard rules. Others suggest the satire hit too close to home for the era's gatekeepers. Either way, the divide between critics and audiences couldn't have been clearer, and as the years went by, it's the audience verdict that stuck. The Long Hot Summer. When The Long Hot Summer hit theaters in 1958, critics couldn't decide what to make of it. Some dismissed it as a sultry knockoff of Tennessee Williams, too heavy on heat and melodrama. Others praised its performances, especially Paul Newman's smoldering turn as Ben Quick. a role that helped catapult him from supporting player to full-fledged star. Audiences, however, didn't hesitate. They showed up and kept showing up. Newman's chemistry with Joanne Woodward, already his off-screen partner by the time of release, drew attention both for its intensity and for fueling rumors that the film doubled as a thinly veiled showcase for their real-life romance. While some reviewers fixated on the movie's stylized atmosphere, others overlooked its deeper commentary on class, ambition, and Southern decay. Loosely adapted from several William Faulkner stories, including Barn Burning and Spotted Horses, this picture used oppressive heat as a metaphor for social pressure simmering beneath genteel facades. In the long run, what was once seen as overwrought has earned a loyal following for its literary roots, moody direction, and sharp dissection of masculinity. Some scholars even argue it captured the decline of the Old South more effectively than its more critically beloved peers. And according to one long-circulating rumor, director Martin Ritt deliberately leaned into the steamy tone to bait critics, knowing full well audiences would eat it up. The Carpetbaggers. In 1964, Paramount Pictures dropped a movie that critics tried to bury under a mountain of scorn. The Carpetbaggers, adapted from Harold Robbins' best-selling novel, was lambasted for its over-the-top sensationalism. Time magazine branded it a sickening saga, while the New York Times dismissed it as a gaudy spectacle calling out its obsession with sex, power, and pseudo-Hollywood glitz. But while critics rolled their eyes, audiences lined up and kept lining up. That production took in roughly $28 million domestically, making it one of Paramount's biggest hits that year. At the center of the frenzy was George Peppard's icy portrayal of Jonas Cord, a ruthless aviation tycoon-turned-movie mogul. Many saw Cord as a thinly veiled version of Howard Hughes, though author Harold Robbins claimed the character was a composite of several real-life figures. Either way, the parallels were hard to ignore. Cord's unapologetic ambition and moral detachment mirrored the public's growing gee with unchecked capitalism. Film historian David Thompson once described Cord as a fever dream of American capitalism, a phrase that stuck, even if not directly quoted from his writings. The movie's timing was no accident. By the early 1960s, the production code was crumbling, and the Carpetbaggers pushed boundaries with its themes of manipulation, greed, and moral decay. It didn't whisper scandal, it shouted it. That controversy only boosted ticket sales. Whispers even imply that Robbins deliberately wrote the novel to bait censors and stir up publicity, knowing controversy could be its own marketing engine. The feature's popularity eventually led to a prequel, Nevada Smith, released in 1966 with Steve McQueen in the lead. It lacked the same shock factor, but still found success, cementing the Carpetbaggers as a pop culture juggernaut of its time. Critics never warmed to it, but audiences didn't care. For all its excess, this drama struck a nerve, and proved that sometimes so-called trash is exactly what sells. Boys' Night Out. Released in May of 1962, Boys' Night Out baffled critics who snubbed it as a shallow and implausible comedy. The New York Times criticized it as tasteless, and many reviewers wrote it off as little more than a glossy, borderline offensive fantasy. But the audience reaction told a different story. The production quietly earned over $3 million at the domestic box office, a strong showing for a mid-budget comedy at that point, and resonated with adult viewers drawn to its risque premise. On the surface, it followed four suburban men, played by James Garner, Tony Randall, Howard Duff, and Howard Morris, who lease a Manhattan apartment to pursue extramarital affairs. Enter Kim Novak, whose character appears to be a glamorous call girl but is secretly a sociology graduate student examining male behavior. Critics largely overlooked the twist, focusing instead on the movie's provocative setup. Yet some modern analysts argue the picture was satirizing the very stereotypes it seemed to promote. Novak's performance, balancing allure with academic precision, has since been viewed as a clever inversion of the era's dumb blonde archetype. The feature's commentary on suburban malaise and gender expectations may have been too subtle, or too subversive for early 60s reviewers. Several commentators propose its blend of romantic comedy and social critique clashed with critical expectations molded by the studio system's polished marketing. Legends still claim that Novak, who also served as a producer, pushed for the double-layered narrative to challenge both Hollywood norms and audience assumptions. Today, Boys' Night Out stands as a curious relic of a transitional era, where the fantasy of the bachelor pad crossed paths with the emerging tide of female autonomy and satire slipped past the gatekeepers of conventional taste. Payton Place. Released in December of 1957, Payton Place sparked a cultural firestorm, and not just for its box office numbers. Based on Grace Metalius's controversial novel, the film tackled taboo topics like teenage pregnancy and family trauma head-on, something Hollywood's production code had long tried to suppress. Critics weren't impressed. Some panned it as lurid melodrama, with the New York Times labeling it glossy and gossipy, while others accused it of dressing exploitation in prestige clothing. But audiences disagreed, loudly. The movie grossed nearly $25 million in total receipts, with about $11.5 million in domestic rentals, making it one of the top earners of the decade. It also scored 9 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Actress for Lana Turner. Her performance as a tightly wound mother dealing with buried secrets helped reposition her career at a critical moment. Speculation ran rampant that studio executives leaned into the film's scandalous themes to distract from Turner's off-screen tabloid troubles, but the real twist came months later. In April of 1958, after the film's release but before the Oscars, Turner's daughter was involved in the fatal stabbing of her mother's boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato. The case ruled headlines and cast a long shadow over Turner's nomination. Behind the scenes, Payton Place tested the limits of Hollywood censorship. While the film softened parts of the novel, it still pushed the production code to its breaking point. Some critics warned it signaled a slide into moral decline. Others quietly admitted it marked a necessary shift. Either way, the door was open. The film's legacy only grew when it inspired a hit television series in 1964, which ran for 5 seasons through 1969. For all the critical hand-wringing, Payton Place proved one thing beyond doubt. Audiences were ready for stories that peeled back the curtain on the American dream, and maybe even preferred what they saw underneath. Butterfield 8. When MGM unveiled Butterfield 8 in 1960, reviewers were quick to condemn it. The New York Times described the story as shallow and sordid, while Time magazine took aim at what it saw as sensationalism disguised as moral drama. But the public disagreed, loudly. The feature grossed over $10 million domestically, a hefty sum for the era. At the heart of the buzz was Elizabeth Taylor, cast as Gloria Wandress, a New York woman entangled in a world of judgment and desire. Taylor reportedly disliked the movie and only accepted the role to fulfill her MGM contract. She once referred to the project as, in her words, a piece of obscenity, a phrase echoed in multiple biographies. Ironically, that same performance won her the Best Actress Oscar at the 33rd Academy Awards. Certain observers believe the win was a sympathy nod following her near-fatal illness and emergency tracheotomy in March of 1961. Others credit her raw delivery as a career-defining moment. The picture's themes, sexual agency, moral contradictions, and societal double standards, were unusually direct for a pre-sexual revolution America. Reviewers called it exploitative, but later reappraisals suggest audiences, especially women, saw something more. A character who refused to be shamed into silence. Talk persists that Taylor's Oscar victory was as much about Hollywood politics as performance, but either way, Butterfield 8 endures as a rare case of a cinematic work critics scorned while viewers couldn't look away. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.